Yo, how's it going everyone? Jinsula here with a brand new Pokemon GO discussion video. I hope your day is going really well, and let's get right into it. Okay, so this video is not going to be any kind of news or any kind of, I guess, a guide or anything like that related to Pokemon GO. It's really going to be about that one bonus that we get every single year with the Halloween event. And it is the bonus where if you catch any costume Pokemon with a nice throw, great throw, or excellent throw, you have a very small chance at getting yourself either a rare candy or a rare candy XL. Now on paper, this sounds amazing because usually when they have this bonus, there's just costume Pokemon everywhere. And I do think that for a lot of players, they get really excited about this one bonus, but they end up feeling disappointed. And I think this year was a continuation of that, and I think it's extremely disappointing that Niantic did not take the feedback from the previous year's Halloween event and actually apply some positive changes to this year's Halloween event. Because, yeah, I caught maybe like 300 or 400 costume Pokemon yesterday, and I ended up with maybe like 6 or 7 rare candy XLs and maybe like 10 rare candies, which still feels like a lot for just playing the game, but I do feel like for the amount of effort that I put in, I expected a lot more. I'm not saying that they should have gave out hundreds of rare candies and rare candy XLs, but at the very least, I felt like the rate at which you get these would have improved from the previous year. But Niantic chose not to do that, and I totally understand why, because these items are what incentivizes players to actually go out and spend money in the game with raid battles. But ultimately, I do feel like they could have made it just a little bit better to actually make it feel like a bonus that was worthwhile. But I do feel like when it comes to Pokemon GO and Niantic, this is something that they've been really stingy with when it comes to these sort of premium items. And I think it's a big head scratcher because when it comes to stuff like star pieces, incenses, as well as lucky eggs, they tend to give those out a lot more frequently. But when it comes to specifically the rare candy XLs and rare candies, these are resources that pretty much every player needs. They are always extremely stingy with it. I mean, even for raid days where they promise to give you bonus rare candy XLs, like that doesn't necessarily feel like an impactful bonus. I mean, yeah, it can be very nice when you're raiding a bunch of raid bosses and you get yourself rare candy XLs. It's always a very nice feeling, but ultimately at the end of the day, if you're spending money on this game or if you're spending a lot of time in this game, which are two resources that every player has a limited amount of, I do think that Niantic needs to give back just a little bit more, especially for players who are specifically looking for either of these two items. Now, one thing that I've been always suggesting, especially since last year's Halloween event, which I think was the first time they had this bonus, was that this should actually be a main part of the game. That if you're catching Pokemon with excellent throws and great throws and nice throws, there needs to be just a little bit more incentive for players to actually work on getting those consistently. And I think that when it comes to catching Pokemon, it's probably the one skill in the game that a lot of players tend to neglect. And I do think that aside from getting bonus experience as well as a higher chance at catching the Pokemon, Niantic could do a lot more to incentivize players to actually try to get better throws whenever they catch Pokemon. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's actually a really good skill to learn, especially when it comes to trying to get legendary Pokemon from 5-star raids as well as mythicals, mainly because when it comes to those Pokemon, you obviously have a super low catch rate, and aside from using golden raspberries, getting consistent excellent throws is always going to allow you to catch more legendaries. And that is something that I always tell to the most newest of players because it's extremely important that you work on getting better throws. But when it comes to that, there's typically a lot of other skills that players utilize, like the set circle trick, which is a very classic trick when it comes to catching legendaries. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, you need to learn how to get more excellent throws, especially excellent curveball throws. But Niantic doesn't give you too many incentives for doing it, so I think a lot of players, especially newer players, make the mistake of not actually committing to getting better throws. It's a skill that is super important, but a lot of players tend to neglect it. And yeah, for long-term players like myself, it's good to inform newer players regarding why this is so important, but I think Niantic could do their part in creating some incentives to actually excite players and motivate players to get better at throwing. And I think this is something that shouldn't be just one day out of the year. I think maybe they could have a super low chance at you getting a rare candy XL or rare candy, but have it be an actual part of the game. I think that would go over a lot better than just having it for one day out of the year at a super low rate. Now, I definitely think there's going to be players who will disagree with me, especially those who have been playing for a very long time, because for a lot of those players, they're going to think that something like that is going to be incredibly broken. And for Niantic, they're going to see that as a way to reduce the amount of revenue that they're going to generate from raid battles, because a big primary motivation for doing raids is, of course, getting those rare candy XLs. But in my opinion, I think if Niantic were to not be so stingy when it comes to this one item, it will be better for the long-term health of Pokemon Go, especially because when it comes to certain things like the Master League in Go Battle League, and of course when it comes to legendary raids themselves, for players who have a very hard time grinding out for rare candies and rare candies XLs to max out their best Pokemon, it creates an imbalance in the game, especially when it comes to the competitiveness of the Go Battle League. I think one of the things that hinders players from getting into PvP is the fact that they do not have the top tier Pokemon in their collection, because especially when it comes to the Open Master League, like not only do you need the best counters, which typically are legendaries, but you also need 100% IVs and a whole bunch of rare candies and rare candies XLs in order to max them out. And I think because of that, a lot of players tend to completely neglect the Master League, or they just forego doing any PvP battles to begin with. So I do think this is something that Niantic can address very easily by having this one incentive be a part of the game. It's a quality of life improvement that I think could benefit pretty much every single player, because no matter how much you raid and no matter how much you do a lot of things that earn you this item, it's never going to be enough, because it's specifically when it comes to raid battles, like you need 6 copies of typically of the best Pokemon, and sometimes the best Pokemon is going to be legendaries, and because of that, it's going to be extremely difficult to not only get yourself 6 Pokemon, or maybe 5 if you count Mega Evolutions, of the same Pokemon, but you also need the exorbitant amount of candies to max those out. So I think Niantic could do something to alleviate that stress on players by having these sort of things be year-round. Now let me also say this, when it comes to Pokemon Go right now, I think Niantic could do a lot of things that maybe goes against their core philosophies, but it's something that could be a good gesture to players, especially because there is a lot of negative sentiments towards Pokemon Go from some of the most dedicated fans of the game. Like for myself, I tend to criticize Niantic and Pokemon Go quite often, and the reason for that is because when it comes to this game, I feel like there are so many issues that have been prevalent for several years that Niantic has never addressed, or they just neglect to do so, and because of that, the game is kind of falling off, in my opinion. Maybe it's not necessarily so when it comes to the player base, but in my opinion, the game has drastically declined over the years when it should be improving to get more players to play the game. And I think that is a state of Niantic just being a little bit out of touch with the community, because if they actually played the game the way other players are playing the game, then they wouldn't do things like nerfing remote raids or being very stingy with Rare Candy XL. They would recognize that players will still continue to spend money and they will still continue to play the game if they were to get the right incentives and if Niantic were to cater to more how players have their playstyles. Because in my opinion, remote raiding did not kill the raiding scene in Pokemon Go. If anything, it enhanced it, and it actually drove players to do some in-person content, and it also drove players to spend more in Pokemon Go. And I totally recognize, and this is because I've actually spoken with Michael Staranka on this topic, but I totally recognize that when it comes to remote raiding, that maybe for the long term of Pokemon Go, that means more players are going to get 100% IVs or shinies or shundos of legendaries more quickly, so it's going to create the sense that they just simply do not ever need to raid anymore. But I do think that was something that just did not make sense to me, because if you think about the nature of Pokemon Go and how players play Pokemon Go, it's never going to be enough to just get one 100% IV of every single legendary. They need 5 of them. So there's always going to be that incentive to continue to raid, even if you use remote raid passes. So yeah, in my opinion, I feel like just in general, Niantic needs to lay off on being so stingy. And that's really my argument with this video, because not only was this kind of disappointing for players who really wanted to farm up these items for Halloween, but just in general, it's such a grind to get what you need to succeed with raid battles and with the Master League, and I think Niantic could do more to alleviate that so that players can actually enjoy some of this stuff and have more accessibility to it. That's just really my thoughts around it. So yeah, but maybe I'm completely wrong here. Maybe there is something that I'm completely missing. And maybe you are someone who just simply disagrees with me on this point. And maybe you have some thoughts and arguments that would definitely prove otherwise, that it's actually good that they're stingy with these items. Definitely share your thoughts if that happens to be you, because I really want to know why people would defend Niantic on this, because in my opinion, I think it's completely logical to not be so stingy when it comes to this stuff. But yeah, I could be wrong, and I'm open to having my mind changed. So if you have a really good argument, definitely share it in the comments below, because I would definitely like to hear it. But yeah, that's essentially going to be it for this video. And if you enjoyed it and found it to be insightful, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if it's your first time here. And don't forget that little bell so you can stay up to date on whenever I upload videos. And I want to give a shout out to all my patrons on Patreon. You make this channel content possible. If you want to support this channel in any way, the best way is going to be by joining my Patreon. You could do so by clicking on the links below. And if you become a paid Patreon member, I will add you to my Pokemon Go friends list. So when it comes to stuff like remote raids and the friendship system, if you want to play Pokemon Go with me, then make sure you go and check out my Patreon. And if you want to support my channel in a completely different way that doesn't involve spending money or any kind of memberships or subscriptions, there's always my social media pages. You can go to any of the platforms that you see on screen, look up Count Jinsula, and make sure you follow me to catch up on everything that I'm doing. But yeah, in any case, that's going to be it for this video. I'm Count Jinsula. Be safe, have fun, love yourself, and I will catch you in the next one.